Do you want to learn how to make a passing lights animation like this? Hi, my name is Oyen Orca, a VTuber who tries to draw, and about 2 years ago, I did this animation of my VTuber model sitting in a car as the lights passed by. I received a few comments of people asking how I animated it, and since the technique is actually relatively simple, I finally got around to making a tutorial for this. So without further ado, let's talk about how to animate some passing lights. Let's start off with the base drawing. So this technique is best for scenes like inside a car at night, but it can also be used for when you want to draw inside a train car, outside a lighthouse at night, or basically any scene with a light sort of fading onto the character and then moving to the side. Here, I'm drawing my character inside a car leaning against the windows from the perspective of the interior of the car, but you can also do it from the perspective of outside the car, similarly to what I did in my 2022 version. I go ahead and add in the base colors, the background, and also plan out the general colors I want to use for the shading too. This is done pretty roughly since we'll be redoing this later. Now that we've finished the base drawing, before I actually get into the animating part, I want to give a quick disclaimer that I'm not a professional animator, and this is more of a simple technique that you can add to a static illustration to make it seem more alive. So if you'd like to learn animation or other skills from industry professionals, check out the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, with thousands of classes led by industry experts across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your careers, skills, hobbies, passions, or side hustles to the next level. On the subject of animation, Skillshare has a great category system for a ton of skills including animation, so whether it's for 2D animation, 3D animation, motion graphics, or anything else related to animation and editing, you can find it and learn it on Skillshare. While in this video I'll only be covering lighting animation, if you're wanting to learn more about animation basics, the Basics of Hand Drawn Animation class by Johannes Fast goes over the principles of how to create movement and animation really clearly. This includes things like the 12 principles of animation, how to animate a bouncing ball, and even how to animate a walk cycle. Or, if you want to instead learn how to simply add animations to your drawings, there's the Animated Illustration class by Jamie Bartlett, which goes over techniques that you can use to add simple animations to your illustrations. Both of these classes are under an hour and include a lot of great information, but of course, if you want to go more in depth, there are much longer classes on Skillshare too if you want to really learn even more. So, if you're interested in learning on Skillshare, the first 500 people to use my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Get started today! So next, let's move into adding the lighting. So here we have our finished base drawing. I have my character sitting in the car with some lights in the background, and a multiply layer clipped above the character with just the shading, which is just a dark gray with a light blue for the lighter part. You don't have to follow this exact layer order or format for your drawing, but since I want a darker scene, for now, I'm just sticking to using multiply as the blending mode to keep things simple. I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder, clip that to the character folder, and set this to multiply. This folder will include the lighting layer, which will be animated later, as well as the base shadow. I'll first color pick the shadow layer, just fill that entire layer, and then it'll apply the shadow to the character. Next, I'll make a new animation folder, and in here, set up the animation timeline in Clip Studio Paint. If you're not using Clip Studio Paint, you can also just make a regular folder and draw it frame by frame through splitting the layers, and then using something like EasyGift to put the frames together later. So now I'll go ahead and draw in the lighting layer within the animation folder using a light blue. This is going to act as our base or main lighting layer. Generally, this should be the angle at which the most light is shining on the character. I leave some shadows here where there won't be any light throughout the scene, but make sure to fill it with enough so that I can erase from it later. Basically, the technique is once you have this base lighting layer, we'll be fading in this layer by adjusting the opacity, and then duplicating this layer and erasing frame by frame until the light has kind of moved past the character as if it's sort of behind it, sort of like this. In order to get the fade-in effect, you can duplicate your layer manually and adjust the opacity gradually from 0 to 100% using a few layers. Or, if you're using Clip Studio Paint, you can use the keyframe feature instead. Here, I'll go ahead and click this button to enable keyframes. This will lock the ability to draw or edit the animation layer temporarily, but you can always disable and re-enable this later and it will still keep any keyframes you made earlier. I'll click the plus button under the animation folder, click opacity, and now if I adjust the opacity of the animation folder, it will add a new keyframe. I'll set the first keyframe to 0% opacity, the second one a few frames later to 100% opacity, click play, and now we have a fade-in animation super easily. Now let's disable the keyframes temporarily so we can start adding in the lighting animation and edit this folder. For this, essentially I'm trying to imagine that as the car is moving, it's driving by a street lamp of some sorts, and so basically as the car moves, the position of the lighting will move too. Because the light is coming in from the left, I'll be erasing from right to left, little by little per frame, with the goal in mind to get the light looking like it's kind of shining directly on the character, to instead moving to rim or backlighting. Since both the speed paint and animation itself move pretty quickly, here's a breakdown of all the frames for the lighting layer. Feel free to pause or screenshot if you need to use this as reference. Keep in mind that since this layer is being clipped to the character layer, some of the stuff that you see on the edges may not actually be visible in the final. Now let's check what it looks like when I hit play, and after I adjust a few things, we're done with the lighting animation. While I did this manually without reference, if you're struggling to figure out exactly how to block in the lighting, you can use an online resource such as Magic Poser in order to determine where the lighting should go on the character. For example, if you're using Magic Poser, you can adjust the rotation of where the light is coming from, and then draw according to that as you erase. Now, this next part may be optional for you depending on what angle or scene you drew, but specifically for car scenes, most people would want to add some passing lights in the background as well. So let's talk about how to add more effects. To get the kind of blurry city light effect, I typically like to use a round brush with opacity pressure sensitivity and then sort of lightly draw in some dots, sometimes adding smaller and brighter dots in the center of those to get that sort of blurry, out of focus lights look. I'll use a mix of light blue and red for some nice complementary colors, but you can use any city lights colors. In Clip Studio Paint, you can keyframe movement by once again hitting the Enable Keyframes button. Then under Object, you can then move the item around for the frame that you want it to move to. For example, I want the lights to move from left to right, so for the first keyframe, I'm moving the layer a little off canvas on the left. Then, on the last frame, I move the layer a little off frame to the right, making sure that it's still at the same height. Next, when I click play, it will automatically create the keyframes in the middle for me and move the lights from left to right. I'll do the same for a street lamp as well. On a new animation folder, I just use a light blue airbrush, and then I lightly erase a line down the middle of it just to make it look like a street lamp pole. After I click play, I realize that since the city lights and the street lamp is moving at the same pace, it looks a little strange. Since the street lamps are closer to the viewer and the city lights are supposed to be further, things further from you should visually look like they're moving slower compared to things that are closer to you. So instead, I redrew that layer on a new canvas, copied it back over to the main canvas, made some adjustments to the keyframes, and I finish it up. And finally, for the last finishing touches, if you have something like After Effects or Premiere or video editing software, you can use those programs to add some final effects such as blurring or even camera shake. But if you don't have that, or if you're feeling lazy, something that I like to do to get a little bit of soft anime-like effect for very static animation where the character isn't moving much, like here, I go ahead and choose a middle or neutral layer here, go to the topmost layer, click Merge Visible to New Layer, use Gaussian Blur on that layer, and then lower the opacity. Now we have a nice soft blurry effect here super easily. Since I do have access to After Effects, I'll go ahead and use After Effects filters instead, add a little wobble to emulate a slightly bumpy car ride, and we're done! This is the final animation we did today. And that's it! Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would appreciate if you give this video a like, and subscribe if you'd like to see more from my channel. Also, if you want to learn how to animate a super simple rain animation, check out this video linked on screen here. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!